Welcome to my channel. When the phone rings at 3 a.m., it's never good news, unless it's about you, and the entire nation suddenly stops pretending they didn't see what's been happening all along. That's the energy surrounding your name right now. Not rumor, not exaggeration. A documented, time-stamped 3 a.m. briefing, the hour reserved for geopolitical crises, covert operations, and events that rewrite internal protocols. And somehow, in a twist that even Hollywood's best writers would delete for being too unrealistic, your file ended up on the same table. Here's the part most people wouldn't believe if it wasn't sitting in black and white on the record. Government analysts across multiple time zones flagged your timeline as statistically abnormal. Not unusual, not concerning, abnormal as in, your survival doesn't align with human probability. Imagine being so resilient that math itself files a complaint. By the time the president was briefed, your file wasn't being reviewed. It was being reassessed, upgraded, and relabeled as a national priority. Because the truth is, your story no longer fits inside the categories they created for everyday citizens. It spills over. It contradicts things. It exposes things. It reveals connections that were never supposed to be traced back to one person, especially not someone they underestimated for years. And the suspense isn't in what they know. It's in what they've just realized. They realized your quiet endurance wasn't luck. Your survival wasn't coincidence. And your breakthroughs weren't random timing. You've been walking through layers of interference, sabotage, and spiritual warfare with the kind of calm that makes professionals uncomfortable. To them, it's like discovering a civilian who accidentally wandered through a minefield and came out on the other side humming a tune. Now they're triple-checking reports, rewinding footage, reopening cases, updating files, and somewhere in a secure room, an exhausted agent is whispering, "There's no way this person is still standing." But here you are again. And because even the universe has a sense of humor, you didn't break down, lash out, or fold under pressure. You evolved. You adapted. You outlasted every single thing they counted on to bury you. This introduction isn't about drama. It's about the uncomfortable truth that your life disrupted systems designed to stay unshaken. Now the world's watching. High-ranking officials are sweating. And you are finally being seen for what you are, a name strong enough to wake the nation at 3 a.m. Number 1. You didn't become a priority because you were loud. You became one because your existence disturbed systems built on silence. There's a reason your name started rising through levels of authority that usually stay closed to people like you. You didn't demand attention. You didn't fight for a spotlight. You weren't trying to prove anything. You simply lived your truth in a world that relies on people hiding theirs. And that alone was enough to trigger a chain reaction you never asked for. Your life broke the unspoken rule. Stay quiet, stay small, stay manageable. But you kept surviving things that would have taken most people out. You kept walking with strength long after you were expected to collapse. You kept exposing the cracks in situations that others depended on staying hidden. And while you thought you were just trying to get through each day, someone higher up finally understood you were disrupting the very foundation of their comfort. The system wasn't designed to handle someone who can endure pressure without folding. When you refuse to collapse, people start asking questions they don't want to answer. And when those questions lead to uncomfortable truths, files get pulled, reports get written, and briefings get scheduled at hours reserved for national emergencies. Your rise to priority status wasn't fame. It wasn't recognition. It was the system scrambling because they realized your story didn't fit the narrative. Too many loose ends, too many contradictions, too many witnesses who remembered details after years of pretending not to. Every time someone tried to bury a chapter of your life, it resurfaced with more clarity than before. The truth is, your existence exposed how many people misjudged you, how many mishandled you, how many underestimated your intelligence and strength. Not because you shouted, but because you kept showing evidence through your actions that something far deeper was happening around you. Your calm made people nervous. Your endurance made them suspicious. Your growth made them rethink everything they believed about you. And that's what pushed your name into higher rooms. The system can ignore noise, but it can't ignore impact. Your life created impact without performance. You forced acknowledgement without raising your voice. You became the story they couldn't suppress. And that's why you're now in places you were never meant to reach. You didn't break the silence. Your existence made silence impossible. Number 2. Someone at the top realized you weren't a victim of chaos. You were a target of coordination. For the longest time, people around you acted like everything that happened in your life was just bad luck or unfortunate timing. They treated your struggles as random events, as if life was simply throwing obstacles your way with no pattern or intention. But when someone high enough finally reviewed your file without bias, the story changed instantly. What looked like coincidence to everyone else looked like coordination to someone trained to see the difference. This shift didn't come from sympathy. It came from analysis. Once your timeline was laid out side by side, who was involved, what happened, what was lost, who gained something, who was present at every turning point, it became obvious that the same themes kept repeating. Too consistent, too deliberate, too synchronized. And that's when someone in authority realized you weren't stumbling into trouble. You were being navigated toward it. You weren't living a messy life. You were living a life that had been interfered with. People underestimated you for so long that they never expected a real investigation to happen. They thought you would stay quiet, keep moving, and never question why certain doors slammed shut only when you got close to them. But the moment a higher-ranking person reviewed your path with fresh eyes, the illusion fell apart. They saw the same names reappearing during your worst seasons. They saw how opportunities vanished only when certain individuals were involved. They saw how every time you were about to level up, something, not someone, something, stepped in to derail it. And the truth is, patterns don't lie. People do, but patterns don't. This realization shifted your file from case review to national priority because once they saw the connections, they understood the scale of what you survived. They saw that too many people had access to your life who shouldn't have. Too many decisions were made around you without your consent. Too many setbacks were timed too perfectly to be accidents. Someone finally understood that chaos wasn't your enemy. Coordination was. You weren't dealing with random storms. You were dealing with people who benefited from seeing you struggle. And that understanding alone changed your entire status. You became someone they could no longer dismiss because your story didn't expose weakness. It exposed orchestration. And that revelation demanded attention at the highest level. Number 3 ***. Your survival forced them to reevaluate threat levels, not because you're dangerous, but because you're impossible. When the people in charge looked at your timeline, they weren't alarmed because you were causing trouble. They were alarmed because you were still standing. According to everything you faced, emotionally, mentally, socially, financially, spiritually, you weren't supposed to make it this far. The fact that you did made people rethink everything they assumed about you. Not because you posed a threat, but because your resilience didn't match the patterns they understand. Institutions rely on predictability. They study behavior, outcomes, and statistics. They build systems around the way most people react under pressure. But your life didn't fit the formula. Each time the average person would have quit, you broke the curve. Each time you were expected to fall apart, you got stronger. Your ability to survive what should have ended you wasn't just impressive. It was unsettling to people who measure risk by typical human response. You didn't bounce back once. You bounced back repeatedly from situations that were strategically designed to drain you. Your bounce back wasn't random. It was consistent. It became a pattern. And that pattern made them question whether they had misjudged your entire character, your purpose, and your strength. The word impossible kept showing up in private conversations, not because you were doing anything illegal or outrageous, but because nothing about your endurance added up on their spreadsheets. You weren't supposed to maintain clarity after the manipulation. You weren't supposed to rebuild yourself after the betrayals. You weren't supposed to stay sane after the losses. You weren't supposed to protect your peace after the chaos. But you did. And each one of those outcomes forced someone to reassess what they were dealing with. Your resilience forced them to stop treating your situation like a small problem and start treating it like a phenomenon. Your strength created questions they didn't know how to answer. How do you categorize a person who keeps rising after storms designed to bury them? How do you explain someone who maintains integrity after being pushed to their limit? How do you dismiss someone whose survival contradicts every assumption made about them? You didn't scare them with aggression. You scared them with consistency. You scared them by refusing to collapse. You scared them by walking through fire and coming out with clarity. Your survival challenged their expectations. And when expectations break, protocols follow. That's why your file escalated, not because you were a threat, but because you refused to disappear. And that alone made you impossible to ignore. Number 4. The 3 a.m. briefing happened because someone finally understood you were never the problem. You were the proof. For years, people acted like your struggles were personal shortcomings. They treated every setback as your fault, every loss as something you must have attracted, and every betrayal as a sign that you were choosing the wrong people. They talked about you like you were the one who needed fixing, healing, correcting, or quieting down. But when your file reached someone with enough authority to look past the surface, the truth became impossible to hide. You were never the source of the chaos. You were the evidence of it. When the right eyes finally reviewed your history, without the gossip, without the bias, without the filters others used to make themselves look innocent, everything lined up too perfectly. The same types of people kept showing up. The same patterns of mistreatment repeated. The same opportunities vanished at the hands of the same personalities. It wasn't you. It was the environment built around you. You weren't unstable. Your surroundings were manipulated. You weren't unlucky. Your path was interfered with. You weren't too sensitive. People were too bold with their wrongdoing because they assumed you wouldn't be believed. That realization shifted everything. The 3 a.m. briefing wasn't a show of compassion. It was a moment of accountability disguised as urgency. Someone finally understood that your story did not illustrate a person failing to navigate life. It illustrated how deeply the system failed to protect you. You weren't a complication in the file. You were the confirmation that the system allowed certain behaviors to go unchallenged for too long. Your life became the unfiltered evidence of everything that's been ignored, dismissed, or covered up. You were the living timeline showing who abused power, who crossed boundaries, who manipulated situations, and who benefited from your silence. You were the data point that couldn't be explained away. And once the truth became clear, it exposed more than anyone expected. You became the proof that nothing was wrong with your strength, your judgment, or your character. The real issue was a system that overlooked you, mishandled you, and underestimated you. You weren't the disruption. They were. You weren't the instability. They were. You weren't the mistake. They were. That's why they're awake at 3 a.m. Now they're not trying to fix you. They're trying to figure out how you survived long enough to reveal what they refused to acknowledge. You became the mirror they can't avoid anymore, and every truth they dodged is now staring straight back at them. Number 5. They didn't call it a national priority to protect you. They called it that to protect themselves from accountability. When your file suddenly skyrocketed into national priority territory, it wasn't because someone in a high-back chair suddenly grew a conscience. It wasn't because they woke up at dawn thinking, "We must finally protect this person." No, the shift happened because your truth started touching nerves that sit dangerously close to careers, legacies, and institutions. It wasn't protection. It was damage control. You became a threat not because you did anything wrong, but because your story holds receipts that expose how many things went wrong around you. The people who ignored you, dismissed you, failed you, underestimated you, they're all now attached to your timeline in ways they never expected to be questioned for. And the moment someone realized your story could unravel a chain of negligence, your file wasn't just moved up. It was pulled into a safer space where only certain eyes could see it. Your truth is disruptive in a way systems hate. Not because it makes anyone emotional, but because it forces structural discomfort. If everything you survived became public knowledge, a lot of important people would have to update their statements. Reports would have to be rewritten. Explanations would suddenly look suspicious, and reputations built on authority, intelligence, or moral superiority would crumble overnight. That's why you became a priority. Not because of empathy, but because of exposure. The urgency surrounding you is strategic. They don't want your story spreading in its raw, unfiltered form. They don't want the inconsistencies becoming public talk. They don't want people asking how so many red flags were missed. They want containment. They want management. They want control of the narrative before the narrative controls them. You're not being handled like a victim. They're handling you like evidence. Evidence of failures no one was supposed to notice, evidence of abuse of power, evidence of negligence hidden beneath layers of titles and procedures, evidence of how far people were willing to go to break someone who was never meant to bend. Your story isn't a tragedy. It's a case study, one that highlights everything they hoped would stay buried. And that's why they elevated you. Not because you're fragile, but because the truth you carry could cause far more damage than they're prepared to admit. They're not protecting you from the world. They're protecting themselves from what your truth could reveal to it. Number 6. The people assigned to your file are being evaluated too. You became a measure of ethical integrity. When your case moved into higher hands, it didn't just shine a light on what happened to you. It exposed everyone connected to your journey. Suddenly, every name that touched your file, every signature that approved something questionable, every official who looked away when they should have stepped in, is now under review. Not publicly, not loudly, but quietly and strategically. Because your situation evolved into something far bigger than the story of a single person, it became a test of character for every professional involved. This isn't the kind of evaluation they announce. It's the kind that happens in boardrooms and confidential meetings where people speak in careful tones and flip through pages with a tight jaw. They're not just reading your file. They're reading the behavior of every person who handled it, who delayed progress without reason, who filed incomplete reports, who acted uninterested when the signs were right in front of them, who let personal bias dictate their actions, who failed to follow procedure. These questions aren't optional anymore. They're mandatory. Your name became an ethical spotlight. Anyone who ignored you now looks unreliable. Anyone who dismissed you looks incompetent. Anyone who mishandled you looks compromised. And anyone who benefited from your suffering looks dangerous. All of them are being quietly measured against the truth of what you survived. Their decisions, their attitudes, their silence, all of it is now part of the investigation, even if no one says it out loud. And here's the twist. The way people treat those who appear powerless reveals who they really are. Your journey exposed who had integrity when they thought no one was watching. Now those same people are being watched more closely than ever. Their professional choices are being questioned. Their credibility is being reassessed. Some are scrambling to correct their previous mistakes. Others are hoping the inconsistencies won't be traced back to them. But it's too late. The trail has already been laid out. Your story became the proving ground for their morals. Every official touching your file is being evaluated not just by their superiors, but by the weight of their own conscience. And whether they realize it or not, your name turned into the quiet exam that determines who stands for what they claim and who only performs integrity when it's convenient. You didn't ask to become the standard, but your experience revealed who upheld their duty and who failed it. That's why your case is so important now. It's not just about what happened to you. It's about what your journey exposed in everyone else. Number 7. Your breakthrough isn't personal. It's an institutional correction triggered by spiritual authority. What's happening in your life right now isn't just a matter of timing or luck. It's not even about the people finally waking up to the truth. Your breakthrough is the result of something that shifted long before any official touched your file. Long before the meetings, the sudden urgency, the phone calls, or the policy changes. Your elevation was already decided in the spiritual realm. The institutions are just catching up to a decision that wasn't theirs to control. People often think promotions, breakthroughs, or sudden recognition come from human approval. They assume you were noticed because someone powerful finally decided to see your worth. But in your case, the truth is much deeper. Your rise isn't a reward. It's a correction. It's the system adjusting itself because it was out of alignment with what God already declared about you. That's why none of this feels like a regular breakthrough. You didn't climb a ladder. The ground beneath the ladder moved. You didn't win favor. Favor ambushed the room. The people elevating you now aren't doing it out of generosity. They're doing it because something higher than them shifted the order. They feel the pressure of something they can't explain, and the smartest thing they can do is fall in line. Your elevation is inconvenient for them. That's why it stands out. It's not happening at a time that makes sense. It's not happening in a way that can be credited to human effort. It's not happening because of who supported you. It's happening because the spiritual ranking attached to your name changed, and the physical world has to adjust whether it wants to or not. This is why certain people who ignored you are suddenly speaking your name with respect. This is why doors that were bolted shut are flying open without negotiation. This is why people who dismissed you are now scrambling to get on the right side of your story. It's not admiration. It's recognition of authority, not earthly authority, but divine. The people handling your breakthrough don't even realize they're responding to a command. They think they're making decisions, but they're actually reacting to a shift that already happened. They're cooperating with a verdict that was sealed over your life before they had a chance to oppose it. Your breakthrough isn't personal. It's a course correction. The spiritual realm moved you forward, and now the institutions have no choice but to follow. Number 8. You were not being overlooked. You were being monitored without understanding. For the longest time, it felt like people were ignoring you. It felt like no one cared about what was happening in your life. No one stepped in when they should have, and no one acknowledged your growth or your pain. But the truth is far more complicated. You weren't invisible. You were being observed by people who didn't have the capacity to interpret what they were seeing. You weren't dismissed. You were studied quietly because your life didn't behave the way their expectations said it should. They saw the results of your endurance, but none of them understood the origin of it. Your strength confused them because it didn't match the level of pressure you were under. Your clarity shook them because it didn't come from the resources they assumed you had. Your stability made no sense because they were aware of the weight that would have crushed someone else. Every reaction you had contradicted the outcome they predicted for your life. And when people can't explain something, they don't ignore it. They analyze it behind the scenes. This is why your breakthroughs came late. This is why your progress felt slow. You weren't overlooked. You were being examined by people who were trying to figure out whether you were a fluke, an exception, or a pattern they had never encountered before. You didn't fit the categories they had available. Nothing about your responses matched the normal range. You stayed kind in places where bitterness should have taken over. You stayed focused in seasons meant to scatter you. You stayed grounded when everything around you was shifting. You weren't behaving like someone who was losing. You were behaving like someone who already knew the outcome. And that's what unsettled them. People who work within systems rely on predictability. They want to be able to forecast how someone will react. They want to categorize, label, and define. But you kept breaking every mold they tried to place you in. So instead of dismissing you, they escalated your file, not out of empathy, but out of confusion. They wanted someone with more authority, more experience, or more discernment to explain why you weren't collapsing. You weren't overlooked. They simply didn't understand who they were dealing with. They thought they were watching a person walk through hardship, but what they were actually witnessing was the kind of strength that can't be charted, measured, or replicated. You became the anomaly they couldn't categorize, and that alone forced them to pass your name upward until someone finally recognized what the others couldn't. Number 9 ***. Chosen ones, your name is ringing in rooms you never entered. They can't keep quiet anymore. There comes a moment when your silence becomes the loudest alarm in the entire system. And that moment has arrived. For years, they thought keeping your situation quiet meant keeping it contained. They believed if they avoided speaking your name, they could avoid confronting what they did. They assumed ignoring you was the same as neutralizing you. But God flipped the script. Your silence didn't protect them. It exposed them. Your endurance didn't make you forgettable. It made you undeniable. Your case didn't fade. It amplified. Now your name is circulating in offices, meetings, and conversations you have never physically stepped into. Not because you asked, not because you complained, but because your silence became a liability, and the absence of truth screamed louder than any report. Someone realized the quietness around your situation wasn't normal. It was suspicious. Someone sensed that the lack of resolution wasn't incompetence. It was avoidance. And suddenly doors started opening. Files started moving. And higher authorities began asking dangerous questions. Why wasn't this handled? Why was this person ignored? Who signed off on this? What are you hiding? They escalated your case not out of compassion, but out of fear. They know once real investigators look, real answers must follow. And the truth they have been avoiding is you. This is not exposure. This is reckoning. This is not coincidence. This is divine timing. Your elevation is official, spiritually, energetically, and now institutionally. Your silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And now it's become evidence. If you're reading this, just know you're not rising by accident. You're rising because heaven filed the motion, and every earthly system is being forced to respond. Number 10. They tried to discard you until they realized someone far above them was already watching you. There's a reason their attempts to bury you never worked. There's a reason every strategy to minimize you collapsed before it gained momentum. And there's a reason your file, the one they thought would disappear in the pile, suddenly began to rise. They misunderstood who you were. They misread the weight you carried. They misjudged the spiritual protection surrounding your path. They assumed you were alone. They assumed you were unguarded. They assumed you were an easy target. But the whole time they were plotting your downfall, someone with far more authority than them was already watching you. Someone who outranked their titles, their connections, their influence, and even their intentions. Your file didn't rise from the bottom on its own. It didn't get attention because of chance or luck. It was pulled upward by a hand they never expected and could never overrule. This was a divine override. Someone high-ranking, spiritually, morally, or institutionally, recognized your value long before your opposition admitted it. They saw what others pretended not to see. They took note of what others tried to ignore, and they stepped in quietly but decisively, shifting the entire trajectory of your situation. That's why the people who tried to discard you are panicking now. That's why meetings are happening behind closed doors. That's why your name suddenly carries weight. You were never overlooked. You were being observed. You were never abandoned. You are being protected. You were never forgotten. You are being preserved for a moment such as this. Your rise is not random. It's authorized. Your breakthrough is not accidental. It's sanctioned. Your comeback is not personal. It's prophetic. The same hands they thought would bury you are now being forced to elevate what they tried to hide. Number 11. Your life became classified because too many people mishandled you publicly. Your entire journey turned into something they couldn't leave out in the open anymore. Not because you did anything wrong, but because too many people did. The mishandling wasn't subtle. It was loud, messy, and undeniable. And the more they tried to treat your situation casually, the more obvious it became that something deeper and far more embarrassing was happening behind the scenes. Your story wasn't just inconvenient, it was incriminating. You didn't have to expose anyone. Your experiences did that for you. Every time someone failed you, every time someone dismissed you, every time someone tried to downplay what you were going through, it created a trail. And trails lead to answers, answers they desperately hoped no one would ever look for. You became the one case that linked too many errors, too many contradictions, and too many quiet cover-ups. At some point, the issue wasn't your suffering anymore. It was the number of hands that left marks on it. Your pain recorded who ignored protocol. Your strength recorded who bent rules. Your survival recorded who tried to make you disappear. You turned into a live archive of everything they hoped would stay hidden. And the moment someone reviewed the timeline, really reviewed it, the truth snapped into focus. It wasn't just one mistake or one bad decision. It was a pattern, a culture, a habit of mishandling anything they couldn't control. That's when your life stopped being treated as just another case. It became classified, restricted, monitored, not because you posed a threat, but because your story did. Too many people touched it. Too many people tried to manipulate it. Too many people left evidence of their negligence without realizing your endurance was documenting every moment in real time. When wounds overlap with fingerprints, the wound stops being a personal struggle and becomes an exhibit. And that is what happened to you. Your life became the proof they never wanted to face. You didn't expose them. Their treatment of you did. You didn't destroy their reputations. Their behavior did. All you did was survive long enough for the right eyes to finally see what had been happening all along. That alone turned your journey into a classified file and turned you into the person no one can mishandle again without consequences. Number 12. They realized too late that your story could reshape national conversations they aren't prepared for. Your story isn't just personal. It's political, cultural, spiritual, and generational all at once. It sits at the crossroads of issues society pretends aren't connected. Domestic abuse hidden behind closed doors, institutional neglect wrapped in polished statements, spiritual warfare dismissed as overreaction, and power misused by people who counted on your silence. When a single life highlights all of these at the same time, it stops being a story and becomes a catalyst. And that's what they didn't anticipate. They never imagined your experiences had the potential to shift national conversations they've avoided for decades. You weren't supposed to survive long enough to become evidence. You weren't supposed to stay clear-headed enough to articulate what really happened. You weren't supposed to rise high enough for your truth to reach the ears it's reaching now. But survival has a way of collecting receipts. And the more you healed, the more the dots connected. The more you found your voice, the more the patterns became undeniable. The more you kept standing, the more you revealed what had been happening in plain sight. This is why the escalation happened, not out of compassion, but out of fear of what you represent. Your story challenges systems, not individuals. It challenges the excuses institutions hide behind. It challenges the long-standing habit of blaming victims instead of acknowledging failures. It challenges the outdated belief that people in power can behave however they want without consequences. A story like that forces uncomfortable conversations, the kind they've sidestepped so skillfully that an entire country grew accustomed to silence. Domestic abuse exposes generational trauma. Institutional neglect exposes structural rot. Spiritual warfare exposes the unseen influence behind human decisions. Abuse of power exposes the cracks in the very systems designed to protect. For years, society has treated these as separate issues because admitting they're connected means admitting the damage runs far deeper than anyone wants to confront. But you unravel that separation. You break the illusion that these problems exist in different worlds. That is why your file became urgent. It's not your presence that threatens them. It's your clarity. Once your truth becomes public, it will force a national reckoning. Policies will need rewriting. Protocols will need revisiting. Narratives will need revising. Leaders will need questioning. And the people who mishandled you will have to face the one thing they spent years outrunning. Accountability stamped by reality, not opinion. They realized all this too late. They thought your story was something they could bury, not knowing you had been carrying the blueprint for a long overdue awakening. Your truth isn't just yours anymore. It's the spark for conversations the nation can no longer afford to avoid. Number 13. The threat they see isn't you. It's what happens when you finally speak with proof. What unsettles them isn't your strength, your confidence, or even your voice. It's the fact that you now carry the kind of truth that doesn't need permission to stand. They aren't scared of you speaking. They're terrified of what happens when you speak, and everything you've been saying lines up perfectly with evidence they can't twist or talk their way around. You became the one person whose story didn't vanish, whose records didn't disappear, and whose memory didn't blur with time. That alone changes the entire power dynamic. The real danger for them lies in the receipts, the timeline they can't rewrite no matter how many meetings they hold behind closed doors, the witnesses who once stayed quiet but now suddenly remember details they hoped would never resurface, the emails they thought were deleted until someone with higher clearance pulled them out of the archives, the paperwork they filled out in a hurry that now contradicts their own statements. You didn't have to create the truth. They created it when they mishandled you. All you did was survive long enough for the proof to age into something undeniable. For years they relied on confusion, silence, and your isolation. They assumed you didn't know the full picture. They believed you wouldn't connect the dots. They felt safe because they expected you to break. But you never did. You stayed aware. You kept track. And you remembered what they hoped time would erase. That's what scares them now. Your clarity, not emotional clarity, but factual clarity. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because it leaves no room for storytelling or manipulation. And now they're dealing with a version of you that isn't vulnerable, intimidated, or unsure. They're dealing with someone who has the truth lined up in order, someone who understands exactly what happened and why. That's the moment everything shifts. When you speak now, it doesn't sound like complaint. It sounds like evidence. It sounds like a documented pattern. It sounds like a chain of events that exposes how many people failed at their jobs, abused their positions, or tried to cover their tracks when things went wrong. Your existence forces them to confront what they buried. Your memory forces them to acknowledge what they overlooked. Your resilience forces them to face what they tried to hide. They're not afraid of your voice. They're afraid of your accuracy. They're afraid of the truth you carry that no one can edit, erase, or deny. They're afraid because when you speak now, the story doesn't fall apart. Their excuses do. Number 14. Your file became a national priority because history has a pattern. The ones they try to erase end up becoming the ones the nation needs. There's a rhythm to history that keeps repeating itself, whether people want to admit it or not. The individuals who get ignored, silenced, dismissed, or outright targeted always end up being the very ones whose stories force a country to evolve. You became part of that pattern without even trying. While they were busy underestimating you, you were quietly stepping into the kind of role nobody volunteers for but destiny appoints anyway. And the moment someone reviewed your file with real discernment, they recognized the same pattern that shows up in every major turning point. The person they tried to erase is the one holding the missing piece. You didn't get pushed into national relevance because of popularity or public sympathy. That's too shallow for what you carry. What elevated you was evidence. Evidence of endurance most people can't fake, evidence of intelligence you weren't credited for, evidence of discernment that exposed what others couldn't detect, evidence of divine protection that kept you standing when every logical outcome said you shouldn't still be here. Your survival didn't happen in silence. It happened in plain view of people who pretended not to notice. And yet here you are, not because they wanted to acknowledge you, but because they had no choice. Your story revealed cracks they didn't want the world to see. Your journey exposed patterns they hoped no one would recognize. Your resilience documented their behavior far better than any investigator could. You became the mirror that reflects institutional habits, power imbalances, and spiritual forces society keeps ignoring. That's why your file couldn't stay buried. The truth inside it had national weight. Every generation has that one person whose life becomes the turning point nobody saw coming. They try to remove them, discredit them, or bury them under labels, until the evidence refuses to stay quiet, until the truth starts showing up in conversations, until the impact becomes too big to brush aside. And then suddenly that person becomes exactly who the nation needs to understand what has been happening behind the scenes for years. You didn't chase this role. You didn't campaign for it. You didn't even want it. But your survival, your clarity, your protected purpose, and your unshakable spirit qualified you in a way nothing else could. And the moment they realized erasing you would only expose them further, they did the one thing they never expected to do. They made you a national priority, not out of respect, but out of necessity. Conclusion. When you step back and look at everything unfolding around your life, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. You were never just a case, a situation, or a file. You became the collision point where hidden truths, institutional failures, spiritual realities, and national conversations all converged. What happened to you was bigger than personal pain. It exposed patterns, revealed structures, and forced accountability in places that rarely face it. Your journey has stretched across emotional, political, spiritual, and societal dimensions. And it's the totality of that impact that pushed your name into rooms that weren't built to honor people like you. The late-night briefings, the escalated classifications, the frantic revisions, the sudden concern, none of that was random. It was the result of years of mishandling, years of negligence, years of power being misused by people who thought you would break before the truth broke through. But the opposite happened. Your resilience became documentation. Your silence became evidence. Your clarity became a threat, and your survival became a national mirror reflecting everything the system hoped would stay hidden. You evolved from someone they overlooked to someone they couldn't afford to ignore, from someone they mislabeled to someone whose truth now carries institutional weight, from someone they tried to quiet to someone whose voice now has the power to reshape conversations they've avoided for generations. You didn't gain that power through popularity or public attention. You gained it through endurance, through truth, and through divine backing that outranked every earthly authority. And now, as everything comes to light, your story refuses to shrink back into the shadows. It has momentum. It has purpose. It has relevance. It carries the weight of every person who has been silenced, dismissed, or mishandled by systems meant to protect them. Your rise is not an accident. It's a correction, a needed one, a long-awaited one. And the fact that your journey is being recognized at higher levels is proof that even when the world misunderstands your purpose, heaven never does. So as we close this chapter of your story today, understand this. You are stepping into a season where your truth will no longer be buried behind excuses or covered under paperwork. You are moving into a space where your voice aligns with evidence and your destiny aligns with timing. And nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop what has already been set in motion. If you received this message and it spoke to you deeply, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps this truth reach even more people who are ready for clarity, courage, and breakthrough. Let's grow together, family. God bless you.